The wind howled like a hungry wolf over the grey hill, whipping at the worn clothes of Grandpa Silas and his two grandsons, Finn and Liam. Expelled from the village by a cruel landlord who banished them to the cursed hill with the villagers' mockery echoing in their ears, they had nowhere to go but to the ruins of old Oakhaven Castle. Moss covered the cold, gigantic stones, and the echo of their own footsteps was lost in the roofless corridors, where the cloudy sky peered down like a watchful eye. The decaying grandeur of the place, with its broken towers and crumbling walls, was a silent testament to forgotten times. But for Silas, a protective and wise grandfather, it was their only hope. With hands trembling from age and cold, but the steady gaze of one who knows ancient legends, he knew the fight against the harsh winter and hunger would be arduous. But as the boys, small and fragile, huddled among the stones, he promised himself he would transform that uninhabitable place into a home, no matter the cost. The sun barely dared to peek through the heavy clouds the next morning, casting a pale and cold light over the ruins of Oakhaven. The wind, which had howled like a demon the night before, now blew with a constant lament, whipping at Grandpa Silas's grey hair as he watched his grandsons, Finn and Liam, huddled under a torn piece of canvas he had managed to stretch between two massive stones. The boy's eyes, once full of childish curiosity, now carried the weight of fear and uncertainty. Hunger was a tight knot in Silas's stomach, but his concern for the boys was an even sharper pain. "We cannot stay here, my little ones," he murmured, more to himself than to them. The biting air penetrated his thin clothes, and he knew the approaching harsh winter would be unforgiving. That castle, in its decaying grandeur, was a stone tomb, not a home. But there were promises to be kept. And Silas was not a man to break his word. With a heavy sigh, he stood up, age making his bones creak. "Come on, boys. We need to find a safer place, a place where the wind won't find us so easily." Finn, the elder, about 7 years old, clutched Silas's hand tightly, his blue eyes wide. Liam, still a baby in his grandfather's arms, just snuggled deeper into the scarce warmth. The exploration began. Silas, with the wisdom of one who had lived many seasons and knew the secrets of the land, knew the answer wasn't in the crumbling towers or open courtyards. He led them into the castle's depths, where the walls were thicker, and the ceilings, though cracked, still offered some protection. They crept through dark corridors, where daylight barely penetrated, and the smell of mold and damp earth was constant. Each step echoed, amplified by the sepulchral silence of the place, and the boys clung to Silas as if he were their only anchor in a sea of shadows. It was in a more secluded wing, almost hidden by a partially collapsed wall, that Silas felt a glimmer of hope. There, protected from the strongest wind, was a less damaged section. It seemed to have been an old service wing, or perhaps a small lodging for a high-ranking guard, or even a private study. The walls were still standing, and although the roof had holes, a large part of it remained intact. There was even a fireplace, choked with debris, but visibly functional. To Silas's eyes, it wasn't just a set of ruins. It was a promise. It was a stone house. "See, my brave ones," he said, his voice hoarse but with a tone of triumph. Here we will build our home." The boys looked at the cramped, dark, debris-filled space and saw only more cold stones. But the conviction in their grandfather's voice was contagious. Silas, with energy that seemed to spring from an inexhaustible source of love, began to work immediately. He pushed aside loose stones, removed rotten wood, and swept away dirt with his bare hands. The objective was clear: clean the space, patch the holes in the roof with whatever he could find, fallen tiles, pieces of wood, even thick branches, and rekindle the fireplace. As he worked, his mind wandered. The castle was a labyrinth of forgotten stories. Who lived here? What secrets did these ancient walls hold? He noticed the solidity of the construction, the quality of the stone, the way some sections seemed to have been sealed off long ago. In a corner of what would be their main room, he found what appeared to be an old oak writing desk, heavy and dusty, but incredibly well preserved under a layer of rubble. His rough fingers traced the carvings in the wood, feeling the history in every fiber. It was a piece of furniture that seemed to belong to a time of great wealth, perhaps even of passion. The tension was palpable in the icy air. Every creak of the castle seemed like a sigh from the past, every shadow a ghostly presence. Finn, with his vivid imagination, whispered about the castle ghosts, and Silas, though he tried to calm him, couldn't deny the strange feeling the place exuded. There was something more than just stones and dust there, an ancient energy, perhaps a secret. Night fell again, bringing with it an even more intense cold. Silas had managed to clear a small area, and with the help of some dry branches he found, lit a small fire in the choked fireplace. The smoke rose slowly, finding its way out through the holes in the ceiling, and the warmth, however faint, was a balm. The boys, exhausted, fell asleep near the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Silas sat, watching them, his heart heavy, but with a new determination. That place, which had once seemed like a prison, was now a sanctuary. He had found his stone house, and in it he promised he would find the strength to protect them. But as the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, a thought persisted. What else did these walls hold? The old desk in the corner, with its closed drawers and air of mystery, seemed to whisper secrets of a forgotten time, of lost loves and hidden fortunes. Silas felt that his journey to build a home was just beginning, and that Oakhaven Castle had much more to reveal than just shelter. Morning arrived, crawling lazily through the cracks in the patched roof, painting the stone floor with pale streaks of cold light. The fire in the fireplace had dwindled to dying embers, and the air, though less biting than outside, still nipped at the skin. Grandpa Silas awoke with a groan, his bones protesting against the hard bed. His tired eyes, however, immediately fixed on the sleeping faces of Finn and Liam. They were his reason, his strength, the flame that kept him from succumbing to despair. Hunger was an old acquaintance, but the sight of that space, now a little cleaner, a little more habitable, brought a glimmer of hope. The wind outside continued its incessant lament, but inside, the stone walls seemed to whisper promises of shelter. Silas stood up, stretching his aching muscles. There was much to do. The roof needed more repairs, the fireplace more wood, and the search for food, however fruitless it had been in recent days, could not stop. But his eyes were drawn, almost magnetically, to the old oak writing desk in the corner. It stood there imposing and silent, like a sentinel of time. The night before, exhaustion had prevented him from examining it more closely, but now, under the faint light of dawn, its presence was almost a call. The dark wood, the worn carvings, the closed drawers, everything exuded an air of mystery, an untold story. Silas approached, his rough, calloused hands sliding over the cold surface. It was a remarkable piece of craftsmanship, solid, made to last centuries. He tried to open the upper drawers, but they were stuck, swollen with dampness, or perhaps locked. He pulled harder, the sound of creaking wood echoing in the silence. Nothing. The lower drawers also refused to yield. There was something strange, however. One of the drawers on the right side seemed slightly misaligned, almost imperceptibly, or perhaps it was just age, deterioration. He knelt, examining the underside of the desk, searching for any visible mechanism, any clue. His fingers felt the wood, sensing the textures, the imperfections, and then he felt it. A small indentation, almost hidden beneath the edge of the frame. A spot where the wood felt a little smoother, a little more worn, as if it had been touched repeatedly over the years. He pressed. A soft click, Almost inaudible, broke the silence. The misaligned drawer, which had seemed stuck before, now moved a millimeter, then two. Silas's heart leaped. He pulled carefully, and the drawer slid out, revealing not the interior of a common drawer, but a secret compartment, hidden by a false bottom. The pale morning light danced over what lay inside. His eyes, accustomed to darkness and misery, took a moment to process the sight. They weren't gold coins nor polished jewels. They were stones, rough stones of various sizes, some as small as his thumbnail, others larger, irregular, with an internal luminosity that seemed to defy the dim light of the room. Diamonds, raw. The word echoed in his mind, almost an incredulous whisper. He picked up one of the larger stones. It was cold and heavy in his palm, with a roughness that revealed its untouched nature. But even so, the light refracting from its multiple, still uncut faces was unmistakable. A discreet, yet powerful sparkle, speaking of inestimable value. A fortune, hidden here, in this ruined castle, in this forgotten corner of the world. Beside the diamonds, there was a small package wrapped in faded silk fabric. With trembling hands, Silas unrolled it. Inside, a letter. The paper was ancient, yellowed by time, and the elegant, fluid handwriting seemed to belong to another era. A love letter. The contrast was shocking, the cold hardness of the precious stones, beside the delicacy of a message of affection. Silas felt the weight of the discovery crush him. It wasn't just the wealth, which in itself was overwhelming. It was the secret, the weight of a life, of a love, of a fortune, all hidden and now revealed to him, an old exile in a castle that refused to die. His eyes moved from the diamonds to the letter, and then to the sleeping boys. What did this mean? Where did these diamonds come from? Who hid them, and why? Silas's mind reeled. The promise of a home, which had once seemed an arduous struggle against nature and hopelessness, now transformed into something far more complex, far more dangerous. That treasure, if discovered, could be their salvation or their ruin. The cruel landlord, the villagers who had banished them, they wouldn't hesitate to take everything, and perhaps even more. The castle, which had once been merely a stone shelter, now seemed like a vault, and he, Silas, was the guardian of a secret that could change his family's destiny forever. But the tension intensified. With the fortune came fear. The fear of being discovered, the fear of not knowing how to protect it, the fear of what this revelation might bring. He looked at the letter, feeling it held the key to understanding everything, but hesitated to open it. What would it reveal? A forbidden romance? A betrayal? A crime? Silas carefully closed the secret drawer, the soft click sealing the mystery once more. The diamonds were there, untouched, but their presence was palpable, a silent energy that permeated the air. He sat, watching the boys, his heart pounding. The stone house had revealed its first secret, and with it the promise of a new struggle, a struggle not only against cold and hunger, but against the shadows of the past and the dangers of the present. Oakhaven Castle had more to reveal, and Silas knew his journey was just beginning, now with a much greater weight on his shoulders. The soft click of the secret drawer, as it closed, did not seal the mystery, it merely confined it, transforming the rarefied air of the castle into a chamber of secrets. Silas remained kneeling before the desk, his hands still trembling, his heart beating a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The raw diamonds, invisible now, seemed to burn through the wood, a silent but overwhelming presence. He looked at his grandsons, Finn and Liam, still asleep, oblivious to the fortune and danger resting just a few feet from them. They were so innocent, so vulnerable. That treasure, which should have been the answer to all his prayers, now seemed like a curse in disguise. Silas's mind spun in a whirlwind. Hunger, cold, the hopelessness that accompanied him like faithful shadows, all of it suddenly seemed trivial before the magnitude of his discovery. Diamonds, raw. What would a man like him, an old exile, do with something so valuable, so dangerous? His entire life had been one of hard work and simple honesty. He was no thief, no merchant. He was a grandfather, a protector, and now a guardian of a secret that could cost them their lives. The cruel landlord, the villagers who had banished them, their image, with their covetous eyes and eager hands, haunted Silas's mind. If they knew, if they even suspected, they wouldn't hesitate. Finn and Liam's lives would be traded for those stones without a blink. The castle, which had once been a refuge, now seemed like a trap, a vault with a deadly bait. He rose slowly, his joints creaking in protest. The letter, the love letter. It was still there, in the secret compartment, beside the diamonds. Perhaps it held the answers, the story behind that treasure. Who hid them? Why? And more importantly, who might come looking for them? Hesitation was a knot in Silas's throat. To read the letter meant to delve even deeper into the unknown, to unearth secrets that perhaps should remain buried. But not to read was to live in ignorance, and ignorance that could be fatal. With a heavy sigh, Silas knelt again. His rough fingers felt for the hidden indentation, and the soft click echoed once more in the castle's silence. The drawer slid out, revealing the discreet gleam of the diamonds and the small, faded silk package. He picked up the letter, feeling the ancient, fragile paper in his hands. The elegant, fluid handwriting, almost like a drawing, seemed to whisper stories of a distant time. He unfolded the paper with the utmost care, fearing it would disintegrate in his hands. The pale morning light, now intensifying slightly, illuminated the words. "My dearest Elias," the letter began, the voice of the woman who wrote it seeming to echo through the centuries. Silas felt a shiver. Elias. It wasn't a name he knew. "If you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. I was forced to flee, to leave everything behind. Lord Beaumont discovered our secret, not our love, but the other, the secret of the mines. He is a cruel man, Elias, and he will not hesitate to use any means to get what he wants. I know you asked me not to touch them, not to risk it, but I had no choice. They are our only hope, our only chance for a future far from here, far from his tyranny. I hid the stones in the desk you loved so much, in the place only we knew. They are raw, my love, but their value is inestimable. Use them to build the life we dreamed of, in a place where we can be free, where our love is not a crime and our fortune is not a sentence. Do not come back for me, Elias. Do not look for me. If I am caught, it does not matter. But you must live. You must use this to start anew. Forgive me for this audacity, for disobeying your orders, but my heart tells me it is the only way. May God keep you, my love. May these stones carry you far from danger and guide you to a life of peace. I will love you forever, even if our paths never cross again. Yours forever, Isabel." Silas finished reading, the paper trembling in his hands. Isabel, Elias, Lord Beaumont, mines. The puzzle began to assemble, but each added piece only made the picture darker. It wasn't just a fortune. It was a stolen fortune, or at least hidden from a cruel lord. Lord Beaumont, could he be the same landlord who had banished them, or an ancestor of his? The tension intensified. A tight knot in Silas's stomach. That treasure wasn't just a gift. It was a legacy of despair, an inheritance of danger. The letter spoke of a forbidden love, of an escape, of a greater secret, the secret of the mines. Did this mean there were more diamonds, or that their origin was known to others? Lord Beaumont's tyranny was palpable in every line. Silas felt a chill run down his spine. The promise of salvation now came with the weight of an ancient curse. He looked at the diamonds again, their discreet gleam now seeming more like a warning than a hope. Isabel had hidden the stones for Elias so he could start anew. And now, centuries later, they were in his hands, the hands of a man who also sought a new beginning, a chance to protect his family. Fate was a complex web, and Silas felt entangled in it. The stone house, Oakhaven Castle, was not just a shelter. It was a repository of forgotten stories, of lost loves and hidden fortunes. And he, Silas, was the new guardian, the unexpected link in a chain of events that stretched across generations. The responsibility weighed on him, a burden heavier than any stone he had ever carried. He carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the secret compartment beside the diamonds. He closed the drawer, the final click sealing the secret once more. But the secret was no longer confined to the dark wood. It was in Silas's mind, in his heart, a dangerous flame that could illuminate or consume everything. The journey to build a home had transformed into a race against time, against the shadows of the past and the dangers of the present. Oakhaven Castle had much more to reveal, and Silas knew his struggle was just beginning, now with a much greater weight on his shoulders. The question was no longer whether they would survive, but how, and if the price of survival would be his own peace or his own life. The ancient paper slipped from Silas's trembling hands, falling softly onto the raw diamonds. The click of the drawer as it closed did not seal the mystery, it merely confined it, transforming the rarefied air of the castle into a chamber of secrets. But the secret was no longer confined to the dark wood. It was in Silas's mind, in his heart, a dangerous flame that could illuminate or consume everything. Isabel's words echoed in his head, a lament of centuries that now became his own curse. My dearest Elias, Lord Beaumont discovered our secret, not our love, but the other. The secret of the mines. Mines, diamonds, Lord Beaumont. The puzzle, once fragmented, now fit together with terrifying clarity. It wasn't just a fortune, it was an inheritance of despair, stained by fear and tyranny. Silas remained kneeling, the cold of the stone penetrating his thin clothes, but he felt nothing. His body was paralyzed by the weight of the revelation. He looked at his grandsons, Finn and Liam, still asleep in their childish slumber, oblivious to the web of danger that had just wrapped around them. Their innocence was a brutal contrast to the darkness the letter had revealed. How could he, an old exile, protect these boys from an enemy that seemed to transcend time? Lord Beaumont. Could he be the same landlord who had banished them, who had condemned them to this ruined castle? The one who watched them with hungry eyes, waiting for them to fail, to waste away. The cruelty described by Isabel seemed to echo the same malevolence he felt coming from the current landlord. History was repeating itself, a family curse stretching across generations, and now Silas and his grandsons were at its center, the diamonds. They were salvation, the promise of a life away from hunger and cold. But they were also the bait, the reason Isabel and Elias were forced to flee, the reason Lord Beaumont would become a relentless predator. Silas felt a chill run down his spine. The castle, which had once been a refuge, now seemed like a trap, a vault with a deadly bait. His eyes scanned the room, assessing every crack in the wall, every loose floorboard. The castle was old, full of forgotten nooks and passages. There was a labyrinth of possibilities, but also a labyrinth of dangers. He needed time, solitude, to think, to plan. Hunger and fatigue, once his constant companions, now seemed distant, replaced by a cold adrenaline. He couldn't afford to rest, not now. The life Isabel dreamed of for Elias, a life of freedom and peace, was the same life Silas dreamed of for his grandsons, and he would do anything to achieve it. But how? How could an old man with no resources, no allies, no knowledge of the outside world, transform raw stones into a new life, The letter spoke of mines. Did this mean there were more diamonds, or that their origin was known to others? The secret of the mines was a phrase that hung in the air, laden with implications. Silas felt the weight of responsibility crush him. He could not fail. He could not allow history to repeat itself. For his grandsons to suffer the same fate as Isabel and Elias. He was the guardian now, the unexpected link in a chain of events that stretched across generations. The stone house, Oakhaven Castle, was not just a shelter. It was a repository of forgotten stories, of lost loves and hidden fortunes. He approached the window, watching the morning mist still embracing the twisted trees. The world outside seemed calm, but Silas knew that beneath the surface a storm was brewing. He needed wisdom, cunning, a strength he didn't know he possessed. The journey to build a home had transformed into a race against time, against the shadows of the past and the dangers of the present. Oakhaven Castle had much more to reveal, and Silas knew his struggle was just beginning, now with a much greater weight on his shoulders. The question was no longer whether they would survive, but how. And if the price of survival would be his own peace or his own life. But one thing was certain. He would not back down. He would protect his grandsons, no matter the cost. The first task was clear. Find a new hiding place for the treasure. A hiding place that not even Lord Beaumont, ancient or present, could uncover. Silas knew that time was his most relentless enemy. The faint morning light barely filtered through the dusty windows, but to him it seemed like a beacon of urgency. The diamonds, still in the secret drawer, were a weight on his mind, a magnet for danger. He needed to act, and fast. Every second of hesitation was a risk, an invitation for the past to repeat itself. His eyes, once tired, now gleamed with fierce determination. He moved with a caution he hadn't felt in years, like a hunted animal sniffing danger in the air. First, the drawer. With a smooth motion, he opened it again, revealing the small treasure. The raw diamonds, once symbols of hope, now seemed like stones of an immense burden. Isabel's letter, folded and yellowed, lay there, a silent testament to a lost love and a deadly secret. He picked up the stones, feeling their cold weight in his palm, and then the letter, which he tucked into the inner pocket of his worn coat. Isabel and Elias's secret was now his, and he would protect it with his life. The room, which had once seemed a refuge, was now merely the starting point. Silas began his search, his footsteps echoing softly in the castle's silence. He couldn't afford to be noisy, to wake the boys, to alert any indiscreet ear that might be nearby. Every floorboard, every crack in the stone wall, every dark corner became a potential hiding place, or a trap. He knelt, examining the wooden baseboard, feeling the texture of the cold stone. Oakhaven Castle was a labyrinth of memories, of untold stories, and he hoped that somewhere there was a forgotten place, a perfect refuge. His fingers traced the crevices, searching for any hint of a hidden compartment, of a secret passage that might have been used by generations of inhabitants. He remembered the rumors that surrounded the castle, stories of underground tunnels and hidden rooms, but had never given them credence. Now, every legend seemed like a clue. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, keeping hunger and fatigue at bay. He stood and headed for the fireplace, a monster of dark stone that dominated one of the walls, perhaps behind it, or inside it. He felt the stones, sensing the soot and the cold. Nothing, just the relentless solidity of the rock. He stepped back, his eyes scanning the high ceiling, the dark wooden beams, the cobwebs hanging like forgotten veils. There was a small, almost imperceptible door, camouflaged in the wall opposite the fireplace. A door he had never noticed before, hidden behind a torn tapestry that barely clung to its fastenings. With his heart pounding, Silas pulled back the tapestry, revealing the dark, heavy wood. There was no handle, just a small slit where a hook or lever might have been inserted. He felt the slit, his fingers finding a small, rusted metal protrusion. With an effort, he twisted it. A loud, eerie creak broke the silence, making Silas freeze. He waited, holding his breath, listening to the soft breathing of Finn and Liam. No one woke. The castle, for now, kept its secrets. The door opened slowly, revealing a damp, cold darkness. The smell of mold and old earth hit his nostrils. It wasn't a room, but a narrow, dark passage, descending into what seemed to be the castle's depths. An uneven stone staircase, almost crumbling, led down into the darkness. This was the kind of place the legends described. This was the kind of place where secrets were kept for centuries. Silas hesitated for a moment. The passage was dangerous, dark, and he had no idea what he might find down there. But the desk drawer was no longer safe. The diamonds needed a sanctuary, a place where Lord Beaumont, ancient or present, would never dream of looking. He struck a match, the small flame flickering in the vast darkness, revealing the first steps of the staircase. It was a risk, but one he was willing to take, for the boys, for their future, for their chance at freedom. The journey to build a home had transformed into a descent into the unknown, a dive into the depths of Oakhaven Castle's past. And Silas, the old guardian, was ready to face whatever awaited him. He held the diamonds firmly in one hand, Isabel's letter in his pocket, and the match in the other, as he began to descend. Each step was a move closer to the heart of the mystery, and perhaps closer to the truth about the secret of the mines. The danger was palpable, but the promise of a future for his grandsons was an even greater force. He could not fail. The match flame, a fragile point of light in the immensity of the darkness, danced and trembled, casting ghostly shadows on the damp walls of the passage. Silas felt the heavy, cold air envelop his body, a dense smell of wet earth, mold, and something older, almost mineral, that seemed to come from the depths of the stone itself. Every creak of the door, every echo of his footsteps on the uneven staircase was a reminder of the solitude and isolation that surrounded him. He descended cautiously, his free hand feeling the rough, cold stone wall, sometimes slippery with moss. The steps were uneven, some cracked, others almost crumbling, requiring all his concentration not to stumble. Silas's mind, however, was not solely focused on the physical dangers of the descent. It seethed with Isabel's letter, with words of love and warning, with Lord Beaumont's name. Each step downward was a step closer to the heart of the secret, but also closer to the danger Isabel had desperately tried to avoid. He could almost hear her whisper in the cold air, the urgency in her voice, the pain of her escape. The diamonds in his hand, once a weight of hope, now seemed to burn, a burden connecting him to a centuries-old story, to a curse that refused to die. The passage narrowed as he descended, the stone walls almost brushing his shoulders. The air grew denser, and the sound of dripping water, once distant, was now a constant accompaniment, echoing in the darkness. The match, almost at its end, cast its last flames before extinguishing, plunging Silas into total, suffocating darkness. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm him. Claustrophobia. The fear of the unknown, the sensation of being buried alive. But the image of Finn and Liam, asleep and vulnerable, flashed in his mind, igniting a new flame of determination. He could not fail. He could not afford to be afraid. He struck another match, the renewed light revealing that the staircase ended on a small earthen landing. Ahead, an arched opening, wider than the stair passage, led to a chamber. The smell of earth and ore was even stronger there, mixed with a subtle metallic odor. The small flame revealed walls of rough stone, not worked like those of the castle, but as if they had been excavated directly from the rock. It was an underground chamber, ancient, perhaps even older than Oakhaven Castle itself. His eyes swept the chamber. There was no furniture, just the rawness of the stone, but in the center, an irregular rocky outcrop like an exposed vein gleamed faintly under the matchlight. It was not gold nor silver, but a dark rock with incrustations that reflected the light in a peculiar way. It was as if the earth itself was revealing its secrets, and then he saw it. Small fissures in the rock, and within them, tiny points of light, like stars trapped in the stone. Diamonds, raw, embedded in the rocky matrix, exactly like the ones he held. The secret of the mines. Isabel's letter phrase echoed in his mind with terrifying clarity. They weren't distant mines, they weren't legends. The mine was the castle itself. Oakhaven Castle wasn't just built over a mine, it was the mine. A mine of raw diamonds, hidden beneath the foundations, perhaps secretly exploited for generations, or perhaps forgotten until now. The wealth Isabel and Elias had discovered, the wealth Lord Beaumont coveted, was literally beneath his feet. The revelation was a blow, a shock that left him breathless. The castle was not just a trap, but a treasure, a focal point for greed and danger. The diamonds in his hand were just a sample of what was hidden here, and if he had found it, others could find it. Lord Beaumont, with his relentless pursuit, would be even more determined if he knew the true extent of the wealth. Silas felt a chill run down his spine, not from cold, but from a chilling realization. He needed to hide the diamonds he had, and he needed to protect this place. But how? The chamber was vast, and the exposed rock was an obvious temptation. He needed a hiding place within a hiding place. His eyes scanned the walls, looking for a crevice, an indentation, any place that might go unnoticed. In the farthest corner of the chamber, almost camouflaged by the darkness and the irregularity of the stone, he noticed a small depression, as if a larger stone had been removed long ago. It was a natural niche, not deep but sufficiently discreet. He knelt, feeling the damp, cold earth. Carefully, he placed the raw diamonds inside the niche, one by one, feeling the weight and promise of each. Then, he took Isabel's letter from his pocket and placed it with the stones, a silent testament to the love and sacrifice that had brought them there. With his hands, he began to gather loose earth and small stones, covering the niche, trying to restore the natural appearance of the wall. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best he could do at the moment, under the faint light of the match that would soon extinguish. He knew he would need to return, perhaps with tools, to seal the hiding place more permanently, but for now they were safer there than in the desk drawer. The match went out, plunging the chamber into an even deeper darkness. Silas remained there for a moment, in the oppressive silence, hearing only the dripping water and the beating of his own heart. He had accomplished the first part of his mission. The diamonds were hidden, but the revelation of the mine beneath the castle opened an abyss of new questions and dangers. The fight to protect his grandsons had become infinitely more complex, more perilous. He began to climb the stairs back up, each step an effort, but now with a new clarity in his mind. Oakhaven Castle was not just a home, a refuge. It was a battlefield, a living secret that breathed beneath his feet. And Silas, the old guardian, was ready to fight for it, for his family, for a future that now seemed as precious as the raw diamonds hidden deep within the earth. The journey was just beginning, and the weight of responsibility was immense, but a grandfather's determination was an unbreakable force. The ascent was more arduous than the descent. Each uneven stone step seemed to weigh a ton, not just from physical exertion, but from the burden of knowledge Silas now carried. His leg muscles burned, and the damp, heavy air of the passage seemed to suffocate him. But the image of the diamonds embedded in the rock, the pulsating heart of Oakhaven Castle, propelled him upward. The flame of the last match had long since extinguished, and he climbed in total darkness, guided only by the tactile memory of the walls and steps and by the urgency burning in his chest. After what seemed an eternity, his fingers touched the heavy wood of the secret door. The smell of mold and earth gave way to the drier, dustier air of the main castle. With an effort, he twisted the rusted metal protrusion, and the door creaked again, a sound that seemed to echo throughout the silent castle. He waited, motionless, his heart beating erratically, but the silence remained. Finn and Liam continued to sleep, oblivious to the abyss of secrets opening beneath their feet. Silas emerged from the passage, feeling the relief of being back in the wider space of the room. Carefully, he pushed the door back, feeling the heavy wood fit perfectly, making it almost invisible in the wall. He pulled the torn tapestry back into place, covering the entrance, a fragile barrier against the outside world. It wasn't a permanent solution, he knew, but it was the best he could do for now. The secret was sealed for a brief moment. He stepped away from the wall, feeling overwhelming fatigue, but his mind was in a whirlwind. The revelation of the mine beneath the castle changed everything. Oakhaven was not just an inheritance, a refuge, or even a trap. It was a treasure that Isabel and Elias had discovered, and that Lord Beaumont, with his insatiable greed, coveted with a ferocity that now became terrifyingly clear. Isabel's letter, now hidden with the raw diamonds, seemed to scream its warnings with a new and terrible clarity. She wasn't just fleeing a man, she was fleeing a curse, a relentless pursuit of wealth that she knew would bring only pain. Silas went up the stairs to the boys' room. The faint moonlight entered through the window, illuminating the serene faces of Finn and Liam. They slept deeply, innocent, oblivious to the battle their grandfather was fighting on their behalf. He watched them for a long time, his love for them a palpable, almost painful force. They were the reason for everything, the reason he had descended into darkness, the reason he would now confront Lord Beaumont. The sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. But for Silas, the dawning day brought with it a different kind of darkness. The castle, once a symbol of a new beginning, now revealed itself as a labyrinth of secrets, a fortress built upon a fortune and imminent danger. The wealth he had discovered was not liberation. It was an overwhelming responsibility. How could he protect the boys? How could he keep the secret of a diamond mine beneath a castle that was the target of a powerful and unscrupulous man? He sat in an old, dusty chair in the hallway, his body exhausted, his mind in overdrive. With every creak of the wood, every gust of wind entering through the cracks, he felt the castle's presence, a living entity, guardian of centuries of stories, and now of a monumental secret. The secret of the mines was not a distant legend, but a cold, hard reality, pulsating beneath the foundations. The desk drawer, where he had found the first diamonds, now seemed a ridiculously insecure place. The niche in the underground chamber was better, but still temporary. He needed a plan to protect the diamonds, to protect the boys, and to confront Lord Beaumont. Isabel's letter was more than a love story. It was a map for survival, a warning he now understood in its entirety. As the dawn light spread through the dusty windows, Silas closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts. Oakhaven Castle was not just a house, it was a battlefield, and he, the old guardian, was ready for war. But the war would not be fought with swords or shields. It would be a war of intelligence, patience, and courage against an enemy who was still a shadow, but whose presence was increasingly palpable. The journey to build a home had transformed into a fight for survival, and Silas knew that every decision from now on would be crucial. The fate of Finn and Liam, and the secret of Oakhaven, rested in his aged hands. The sun, an indifferent artist, painted the sky with soft hues of pink and orange, but for Silas, the beauty of that dawn was a cruel irony. The light spreading through the castle's dusty windows brought not clarity, but the shadow of an overwhelming responsibility. He was still sitting in the old chair in the hallway, his body exhausted, but his mind in an incessant whirlwind. The morning silence was merely an illusion, for within him the echo of the underground chamber and the gleam of the raw diamonds reverberated non-stop. Oakhaven Castle. It was not just a house, a refuge, or even a trap. It was a living secret, an entity that breathed beneath his feet, guardian of centuries of stories and now of a monumental fortune. The desk drawer, where he had found the first diamonds, now seemed a ridiculously insecure place, almost naive in its simplicity. The niche in the underground chamber was better, yes, but still temporary. A desperate solution to a problem that had just revealed itself in all its terrible magnitude. He stood up, his muscles protesting with every movement, and walked to the boys' room. Finn and Liam slept, their faces serene under the pale light entering through the window. Their innocence was a balm, and at the same time, a sharp knife in his chest. They were the heart of everything, the reason he had descended into darkness, the reason he would now confront Lord Beaumont. The love for them was a palpable, almost painful force, mixed with fear and determination. Isabel's letter, now hidden with the precious stones, seemed to scream its warnings with a new and terrible clarity. She wasn't just fleeing a man, she was fleeing a curse, a relentless pursuit of wealth that she knew would bring only pain. The secret of the mines. It was not a distant legend, but a cold, hard reality, pulsating beneath the castle's foundations. The wealth he had discovered was not liberation. It was a chain, a responsibility that threatened to suffocate him. How could he protect the boys? How could he keep the secret of a diamond mine beneath a castle that was the target of a powerful and unscrupulous man? Silas's mind raced in circles, trying to find a way out, a plan. Lord Beaumont was not just a greedy man, he was relentless. If he knew the true extent of the wealth, there would be no limits to what he would do to obtain it. The castle would become a battlefield, and Finn and Liam innocent pawns in a deadly game. Silas needed time to think, to plan, to act. The first priority was to ensure no one else discovered the secret passage or the chamber. The torn tapestry was a fragile cover. He needed something more substantial, something that could withstand a more thorough search. His eyes scanned the hallway, seeking inspiration in the shadows and dust. The castle, with its centuries of existence, should have its own secrets, its own defenses. He went down the stairs to the main room, where the fireplace was cold and the air still carried the smell of mold. The room seemed different now, no longer just an ancient space, but a stage for an imminent drama. Every creaking floorboard, every draft entering through the cracks seemed like a warning. He needed a strategy, not just to hide the diamonds, but to divert Beaumont's attention from the entire castle. Perhaps, he thought, the best defense was denial. To make it seem as if there was nothing of value there, that the castle was merely an unimportant ruin. But how? The diamonds Elias and Isabel had found were just a sample. The mine was vast. He couldn't simply ignore it. He needed a way to seal the chamber more permanently, so that it would appear untouched, natural. He would need tools, materials, knowledge he didn't possess. The task seemed insurmountable for a man his age, alone, with 2 grandsons to protect. However, looking at the dawn light that finally flooded the room, Silas felt a new wave of determination. He was not a warrior nor a miner, but he was a grandfather, and a grandfather's determination was an unbreakable force. The journey to build a home had transformed into a fight for survival, and Silas knew that every decision from now on would be crucial. He needed to start small. The first step would be to inspect the passage again, looking for any sign that might betray its existence. Then he would need to think about how to strengthen the door, perhaps even disguise it in some way. The tapestry was a start, but it was not the end. He needed an illusion, a smoke screen to protect the truth. Oakhaven Castle was not just a house, it was a battlefield. And he, the old guardian, was ready for war. But the war would not be fought with swords or shields. It would be a war of intelligence, patience, and courage against an enemy who was still a shadow, but whose presence was increasingly palpable. The fate of Finn and Liam and the secret of Oakhaven rested in his aged hands, and Silas knew he would not fail. Dawn brought with it a brutal clarity, not the clarity of light dispelling shadows, but the clarity of an undeniable truth. Silas was alone. Alone with a ruined castle, 2 sleeping grandsons, and a secret that could cost them their lives. Exhaustion weighed on his bones, but his mind, once a whirlwind of disordered thoughts, now focused with an almost painful sharpness. He needed a plan, and he needed to start immediately. The first step was the secret passage. The torn tapestry was a cruel joke, a smokescreen that would barely fool a child. He descended the stairs again, the creak of the wood echoing in the morning silence. The underground chamber called to him, an abyss of promises and dangers. As he approached the wall, his hand felt the tattered fabric. It wasn't enough. He needed something more robust, something that would blend into the castle's very structure. His eyes scanned the hallway, seeking inspiration. Oakhaven was a museum of rubble, but perhaps among the dust and mold there was something useful. He remembered an old, heavy, solid wooden door he had seen discarded in one of the upper rooms, almost like a piece of trash. It was heavy, robust, and seemed to have been torn from somewhere long ago. With an effort that made his muscles protest, Silas climbed the stairs, the image of that door etched in his mind, finding it was easier than he expected. It leaned against the wall of a dusty room, covered in cobwebs and a thick layer of grime. It was too large for one man to move alone, but the dark wood and rusted ironwork gave it an ancient appearance that would fit perfectly. He needed help, but who? There was no one he could trust, no one who could be brought into the circle of this deadly secret. The answer came in the form of a simple yet laborious idea. He didn't need to move the entire door. He needed panels, planks that could be cut and fitted. With a saw and a hammer he had found in the castle's old workshop, rusted but still functional tools, Silas began his work. The sound of the saw cutting through the old wood was strange and echoed in the silent corridors, a sound he hoped wouldn't wake the boys. He worked for hours, his arms aching, sweat running down his face. Every cut, every hammer blow was an act of determination, a silent promise to his grandsons. He dismantled the door, transforming it into smaller, more manageable planks. Then he carried them down to the secret passage corridor. The plan was simple: build a false wall, a wooden barrier that could be covered by the tapestry, but that offered much greater resistance. As he worked, Silas's mind didn't stop. The idea of making it seem like there was nothing of value there was more complex than it appeared. Lord Beaumont was no fool. He had resources, informants. If he already suspected Oakhaven, a simple facade wouldn't fool him for long. Silas needed a distraction, a smokescreen convincing enough to divert attention from the true treasure. He thought of Isabel's letter, of the words of love and warning. Elias and Isabel had died because of this secret. He would not allow Finn and Liam to suffer the same fate. With every plank he fitted, every nail he hammered, the image of Beaumont's determined face, which he had seen in old newspapers, haunted his thoughts. The man was a predator, and Oakhaven now was his prey. The sun was already high when Finn and Liam finally woke. Their cries of "Grandpa" echoed through the castle, pulling Silas from his working trance. He quickly hid the tools, covering the unfinished work with the torn tapestry. The sight of the boys, rubbing their sleepy eyes, brought a tired smile to his face. They were his strength, but also his greatest vulnerability. "Good morning, my little adventurers," he said, trying to sound as normal as possible. "How about a hearty breakfast today? We have a lot to do." As he prepared a simple breakfast with the few supplies they had, Silas watched the boys play, oblivious to the danger surrounding them. He needed to be intelligent, cunning. The war would not be fought with swords, but with deception and patience. He needed to transform Oakhaven from a treasure into a trap for Beaumont, or at the very least, into a dead-end labyrinth. The false wall was taking shape, but it was only the beginning. He needed a locking mechanism, something that would make it invisible to curious eyes. And then, the matter of the diamonds. The desk drawer was absurd. The niche in the underground chamber, though better, was still accessible once the passage was discovered. He needed a hiding place within a hiding place. The vastness of the castle, once a source of melancholy, now presented itself as a potential ally. Centuries of history, of renovations and forgetfulness, must have left other secrets, other hiding places. Silas promised himself he would explore every corner, every crevice, every false wall Oakhaven could offer. He would become a ghost in his own home, an invisible guardian, protecting what remained of his family and the legacy entrusted to him. The journey to build a home had transformed into a fight for survival, and Silas knew that every decision from now on would be crucial. The game had begun, and he, the old guardian, was ready to play, not for wealth, but for love. The morning sun, which had once seemed a cruel irony, was now a reminder that a new day brought new opportunities to fight. And Silas would fight. He would fight for Finn and Liam, and for Isabel and Elias, whose love had ignited this flame of hope and danger. Oakhaven Castle, the stone castle, was now a battlefield, and Silas, its last defender. He would not fail. Breakfast was a thoughtful silence. Silas watched Finn and Liam, their small faces illuminated by the faint morning light filtering through the dusty windows. They ate with the insatiable appetite of childhood, oblivious to the weight crushing their grandfather's heart. Every laugh, every fallen crumb was a reminder of what was at stake. He needed to be quick, cunning. The false wall was just the first step, a physical barrier against invasion, but the real battle would be fought in the mind, in the art of deception. As the boys scattered to explore some new corner of the castle, Silas returned to the secret passage corridor. The planks he had sawn from the old door lay there, waiting. He began to fit them together, the muffled sound of the hammer hitting nails echoing against the stone walls. The old wood groaned, but held firm. He was no carpenter, but necessity was a relentless master. Every nail was a prayer, every plank a promise. The false wall took shape, a rustic but solid barrier. But a wall, however robust, was not enough. It needed to be invisible, or at least appear to be an integral part of the castle. His eyes scanned the hallway again. There was an old, empty, dust-covered bookshelf leaning against a nearby wall. It was heavy, made of dark, carved wood, and seemed to have been forgotten there for centuries. An idea began to germinate. What if the bookshelf could be moved, or rather made to seem as if it had always been there, hiding the passage? With a Herculean effort, Silas dragged the bookshelf, the creak of old wood scratching the silence. It was heavier than it seemed, but determination gave him a strength he didn't know he possessed. He positioned it in front of the false wall, covering it almost completely. The torn tapestry could be hung over the bookshelf, giving the impression that the wall behind it was just another section of ancient stone. But something was still missing. A locking mechanism, something that would prevent the bookshelf from being easily moved, something that would make it appear fixed. He remembered the castle workshop, a forgotten place where Elias used to spend hours fixing things. There was an old toolbox there, full of rusted screws, broken hinges, and perhaps an old latch or bolt. Silas went down the stairs, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The workshop was a chaos of dusty objects, but he searched with renewed urgency. He found a wrought iron bolt, heavy and corroded but still functional. With a little grease and much effort, he managed to make it slide smoothly again. He returned to the hallway, the bolt in hand. The plan was simple: fix the bolt to the bookshelf and the adjacent wall so that when closed, the bookshelf would be held firmly in place. He would need a drill and screws, but the tools he had found in the workshop were primitive. With the hand drill, he bored into the wood of the bookshelf and the mortar between the stones of the wall, a slow and exhausting task. His hands trembled, but he didn't stop. As he worked, Silas's mind wandered to the larger issue: Beaumont. The false wall and the bookshelf were a passive defense. He needed an offense, a distraction. The idea of making it seem like there was nothing of value there was the key. But how? Oakhaven was a castle, and castles by nature suggested treasures. He needed a story, a false legend that would divert attention. He remembered a conversation he had with Elias years ago about the local legends of Oakhaven, tales of ghosts, of secret passages that led nowhere, of a lost treasure that was never found. Elias always laughed at these stories, but now Silas saw potential in them. What if he could revive one of these legends, directing Beaumont to an endless treasure hunt, far from the true mine? The most popular legend spoke of a treasure hidden in the catacombs beneath the castle chapel, a place Silas knew to be merely a tangle of empty, crumbling tunnels. It was the perfect place for a distraction. He could plant some false clues, perhaps an ancient forged map, or an enigmatic inscription that led to a dead end. The sun was already setting when Silas finally managed to fix the bolt. The bookshelf was now firmly secured, looking like an old, immovable piece of furniture. He hung the tapestry over it, covering the edges and blending it with the dust and cobwebs. To a casual glance, there would be nothing unusual. The secret passage was, for now, safe. He went down to the main room, where Finn and Liam were playing with some wooden blocks they had found. Their innocence was a balm to his tired soul, but also a constant reminder of the imminent danger. "Grandpa, can we explore the chapel tomorrow?" Finn asked, his eyes gleaming with adventure. Silas felt a shiver. The chapel, the perfect place for his distraction. Fate, or perhaps Elias and Isabel, were giving him the tools. "Yes, my son," he replied, a tired smile on his face. "Tomorrow we will explore the chapel. Who knows what ancient secrets it holds?" Silas's voice carried a tone the boys couldn't decipher. It was the voice of a man who had found his purpose, not in wealth, but in defending what was truly priceless: his family. Oakhaven was no longer just a house, nor a battlefield. It was a chessboard, and Silas was ready to move his pieces. Night fell, bringing with it not rest, but the promise of a new day of struggle, deception, and unwavering love. Night fell over Oakhaven like a heavy cloak, but it brought no rest for Silas. The bolt, now firmly fixed, was a small victory, but only that. The bookshelf, with its dusty tapestry, hid the passage, but not the danger. He watched Finn and Liam sleep soundly, their small bodies nestled under makeshift blankets. Each soft breath of theirs was a reminder of what was at stake, a weight that settled on his chest, heavier than the castle stones. He knew Beaumont was not a man of half measures. His informants would already be scouring every legend, every rumor about Oakhaven. The facade of the stone house, once a refuge, was now a beacon for predators. Silas needed more than a false wall. He needed a story, an irresistible bait that would divert attention from the true treasure and, more importantly, from his grandsons. The legend of the catacombs beneath the chapel returned to his mind. Elias always told it with a smile, a story of ghosts and lost treasures that were never found. Now, Silas saw in it not a fable, but a weapon. Oakhaven, in its vast and forgotten history, must have left behind other secrets, other hiding places. He needed to turn the castle's melancholy into an advantage, using its own aura of mystery against those who would come to explore it. The idea of a treasure in the catacombs was perfect. Not Elias's raw diamonds, which were the real threat, but something Beaumont, in his greed, could believe to be valuable. Ancient artifacts, perhaps, forgotten family jewels, something that would justify an exhaustive search, but that in the end would lead to a dead end. Silas's mind worked all night, devising a plan. He would need clues, a forged map, perhaps an enigmatic inscription. Ancient materials were not lacking in the castle. Dusty parchments, charcoal from old fireplaces, even some engraving tools he had found in the workshop. He needed to create a convincing legend, one that intertwined with Oakhaven's true history, but that ended in nothing. The morning sun, filtering through the dusty windows, found Silas exhausted, but with a renewed purpose. He prepared a simple breakfast, watching the boys with a different gaze. Finn and Liam, in their innocence, would be the key. Their natural curiosity, their passion for adventures, could be used to sow the first seeds of the legend. "Grandpa, can we explore the chapel today?" Finn asked again, his eyes gleaming. It was as if fate was conspiring in his favor. "Yes, my little adventurer," Silas replied, a tired but genuine smile appearing on his lips. "Today, the chapel awaits us. Who knows what secrets it hides?" The path to the chapel was a journey through time. Dark, damp corridors, faded tapestries that told stories of centuries past. The chapel itself was a spectacle of majestic decay. Broken stained-glass windows allowed beams of light to dance in the suspended dust, illuminating headless statues and worm-eaten wooden pews. The air was heavy with the smell of mold and history. Finn and Liam ran ahead, their voices echoing in the solemn silence. They pointed at disfigured gargoyles and cracks in the walls, their imaginations running wild. Silas, for his part, was not there for adventure. His eyes scoured every corner, every crevice, every loose stone. He was looking for strategic locations to plant his false clues. On the altar, an old Bible, swollen with damp, lay open to an illegible page. Silas picked it up, feeling the weight of history in his hands. Perhaps an inscription here, a subtle mark that could be interpreted as a riddle. He noticed a small crypt in the floor, covered by a heavy, cracked stone slab. It was an obvious place for a treasure, and therefore perfect for a distraction. He descended the narrow stairs, leading to the catacombs, the boys behind him, their voices now more subdued, a mix of fear and excitement. The catacombs were a labyrinth of damp, dark tunnels filled with empty niches and ancient bones. Silas knew there was no treasure there, only the echo of the dead. But for Beaumont, the promise of wealth would be enough to blind him. He found a particularly hidden niche, partially collapsed, that seemed to have been forgotten for centuries. It was the ideal place for the end of the treasure hunt, a dead end that would consume time and resources. He would need something to mark the spot, something that looked like a final clue, but that in reality led nowhere. As the boys explored, Silas found a piece of ancient parchment, rolled up and almost disintegrated, in a pile of rubble. It was fragile, but still usable. He also found a piece of charcoal. The idea of a rudimentary map with enigmatic symbols began to take shape in his mind. He could draw a map that would lead to a specific point in the chapel, and from there to the catacombs, and finally to the empty niche. "Grandpa, what's this?" Liam asked, pointing to a small, dark wooden box, almost unrecognizable under the dirt and cobwebs. Silas knelt, picking up the box. It was empty, but its carved wood looked ancient and important, perfect. He could use it to hold the first clue, or perhaps to be the empty treasure itself at the end of the search. Back in the main room, as the sun began to set again, Silas sat at the table, the parchment and charcoal before him. He began to sketch, his hand trembling slightly, but his mind focused. crooked lines representing the castle corridors, an X marking the chapel, and a series of symbols he invented on the spot, looking ancient and mysterious. He needed it to be convincing, but not obvious. With each stroke, the image of Beaumont, with his relentless gaze, appeared in his mind. Silas wasn't just drawing a map, he was laying a trap of deception and patience. The diamonds, for now, would remain in the desk drawer, a calculated risk. The priority was to divert the predator. He knew this was just the first phase. Once Beaumont was caught in the web of the legend, Silas would need a safer hiding place for the diamonds, a place that even he couldn't easily find, within the very labyrinth that was Oakhaven. But for now, the false map was his weapon, and the chapel, his battlefield. Night brought with it not rest, but the promise of a new day of struggle, deception, and unwavering love. Silas looked at the unfinished map, feeling the weight of responsibility. He was no hero, but a grandfather, and for his grandsons, he would become the most cunning of guardians. The game had begun, and Silas was ready to play, not for wealth, but for love. The flickering candlelight danced over the ancient parchment, revealing the tortuous lines Silas had traced with charcoal. It wasn't a real map, but a carefully constructed illusion, a spiderweb designed to trap a predator. He had drawn the castle corridors with intentional inaccuracy, adding symbols that seemed ancestral but were the fruit of his own invention. A stylized eye representing the chapel, a spiral indicating the catacombs, and a series of invented runes that, to an inexperienced and greedy eye, would scream treasure. He rubbed the charcoal with a damp cloth, blurring the lines, giving them the patina of time. Then he crumpled the parchment, unfolded it and crumpled it again, repeating the process until the folds and creases seemed centuries old. The smell of mold and dust that permeated Oakhaven was his ally, and he used it to further age the paper, leaving it near a damp crevice for a few hours. The result was convincing. An artifact that seemed to have survived ages, an irresistible invitation to a treasure hunt. The small, dark wooden box Liam had found in the catacombs would be the perfect receptacle for the first clue. Silas cleaned it, but not too much, leaving the accumulated dirt in the carvings to maintain authenticity. He rolled up the parchment, tying it with a piece of frayed twine he found in the workshop, and placed it inside the box. There was nothing else there, just the empty promise of something grand. The plan was simple in its complexity. The box, with the map inside, needed to be found. But not by chance. It needed to be discovered in a way that would feed the legend, that would make Beaumont believe he had stumbled upon something genuine. Silas decided that the best place to plant the first clue would be the main library, a place any explorer of Oakhaven would surely search. He needed a catalyst, an event that would draw attention to the box. The next morning brought a dense fog that enveloped the castle, making it even more mysterious. Finn and Liam, oblivious to the unfolding plot, were full of energy. "Grandpa, can we play hide and seek in the library?" Finn asked, his eyes gleaming. Silas felt a shiver. Fate, or perhaps Elias and Isabel, were once again conspiring in his favor. "Of course, my little ones," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his tired eyes. "But be careful. Oakhaven holds many ancient secrets." He watched as the boys ran to the library, their laughter echoing through the corridors. Silas waited a few minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. Then he picked up the wooden box, feeling the weight of the deception in his hands. He entered the library, the air heavy with the smell of old books and mold. The boys were already hidden, their muffled voices coming from behind the shelves. Silas walked to a particular bookshelf, one that contained volumes on local history and the Oakhaven family genealogy. He knew Beaumont, or his men, would conduct a thorough search. He slid the box behind a row of dusty books, not completely hiding it, but leaving it just visible enough for an attentive eye, for someone who was truly looking. He wanted it to seem like a discovery, not a find. As he walked away, he heard a muffled shout from Finn. "Grandpa, I found a secret hiding place!" Silas felt a knot in his throat. It wasn't the box, but the innocence of those children that drove him. He needed this deception to work. He needed Beaumont to get lost in the false treasure hunt, far from the true treasure, and more importantly, far from his grandsons. Later, while preparing a simple lunch, Silas heard a noise coming from the castle access road. A car. His heart leaped. It was too early for Beaumont, he thought. But apprehension was palpable. He peeked out the window, seeing a black utility vehicle slowly approach. It wasn't Beaumont's car, but the presence of strangers was a sign. They were his scouts, his eyes and ears, already beginning to search. Tension tightened in his chest. The game had officially begun. He needed to act fast. The box in the library, the map in the catacombs, the dead end, everything needed to be perfectly orchestrated. But what about the diamonds? They were still in the desk drawer, a calculated risk, but a risk that now seemed unbearably large. He looked at Finn and Liam, who were drawing at the kitchen table, oblivious to the approaching danger. Their sight was his strength and his weakness. He could not fail. Elias and Isabel had entrusted him with more than a fortune. They had entrusted him with the future. Silas knew he needed a plan B for the diamonds, a hiding place that even he couldn't easily uncover should the deception fail. Oakhaven was a labyrinth of secrets, and he needed to find one that was impenetrable. But for now, the priority was to divert the predator. The bait was cast. Now, it was a matter of waiting to see if Beaumont would bite. Night fell again, but this time there was no promise of rest, only the certainty of an imminent battle. Silas was ready. He was a grandfather, and for his grandsons he would become the most cunning of guardians. The sound of the engine tore through the afternoon silence, a dark omen that materialized in the form of a black utility vehicle gliding down the gravel road. It wasn't Beaumont's car, but Silas knew. They were his eyes, his ears, the scouts announcing the predator's imminent arrival. The sight of them, stepping out of the car with calculated posture, sweeping the horizon with cold, professional gazes sent a shiver down Silas's spine. The game had indeed begun. He felt his heart pound in his chest, a war drum echoing in his veins. Finn and Liam, still oblivious, continued to draw at the kitchen table, their innocent laughter a cruel contrast to the approaching threat. The sight of them was a poignant reminder of what was at stake. The diamonds, the letter, the future. There was no time to lose. The box in the library was bait, but the true diamonds were still in the desk drawer, a risk that now seemed unbearable. Silas needed a safer hiding place, a place that even he couldn't easily uncover, should the deception fail. Oakhaven was a labyrinth of secrets, and he needed to find one that was impenetrable. With a hurried nod to the boys, asking them to continue drawing, Silas headed to the study. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. He opened the desk drawer, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for the velvet pouch. The weight of the raw diamonds in his hand was an overwhelming responsibility. Elias and Isabel's love letter, folded and yellowed, lay there, a silent testament to a love he now protected tooth and nail. Where in Oakhaven, a castle he barely knew, could there be a hiding place that would withstand Beaumont's relentless search? His eyes swept the study, stopping at the imposing stone fireplace, a massive structure that dominated the wall. The stone. Oakhaven was made of stone, and stones held secrets. He knelt, examining the base of the fireplace. Most of the stones were firmly set, cemented by time, but then his fingers brushed a subtle indentation, a small imperfection in the mortar between two larger stones, near the floor. He applied light pressure. Nothing. More pressure. A faint creak. With a concentrated effort, Silas pushed the stone. It yielded a millimeter, then another. It wasn't cemented like the others. It was a loose stone, skillfully disguised, a secret passage, a hiding place. His ancestors, or perhaps Elias, had discovered or created this small flaw in the architecture. Carefully, he managed to move the stone enough to reveal a dark, narrow cavity. It was small, but enough for the velvet pouch. The smell of damp earth and ancient stone filled his nostrils. Perfect. A place that would require intimate knowledge of the house's structure to be found, something Beaumont, in his haste and greed, would likely overlook. He slid the velvet pouch into the cavity, feeling the momentary but intense relief of having the diamonds out of immediate reach. The love letter was carefully placed beside them, an unbreakable link to the past and the future. With a firm push, the stone slid back into place, fitting perfectly, the imperfection now invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Silas stood up, wiping the dust from his hands. Beaumont's scouts were outside, probably already beginning their initial sweep, mapping entry points, vulnerabilities. He could feel their presence, a shadow lurking at the edges of his vision. He returned to the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread and coffee which he had prepared, an anchor in the brewing storm. Finn and Liam were still drawing, their worlds colourful and carefree. Silas forced a smile, trying to mask the storm in his heart. "Grandpa, can we go outside and play after lunch?" Liam asked, holding up a drawing of a dragon. Silas hesitated. Oakhaven's exterior was now a minefield. "Perhaps later, my little ones. Today we'll play inside. The weather is a bit unpredictable." He knew he needed to keep the boys close, under his constant watch. The bait was set in the library. The diamonds were safe for now, but the real battle was just beginning. Beaumont was not a patient man. He wanted the treasure, and he would do anything to get it. Silas looked out the window, the dense fog still enveloping the castle, like a protective veil, but also like a prison. He was a grandfather, and for his grandsons he would become the most cunning of guardians, the fiercest of protectors. The game had begun, and Silas was ready to play, not for wealth, but for love. Night would bring not rest, but the certainty of an imminent battle. He was ready. Beaumont's scouts were outside, probably already beginning their initial sweep, mapping entry points, vulnerabilities. He could feel their presence, a shadow lurking at the edges of his vision. He returned to the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread and coffee, which he had prepared, an anchor in the brewing storm. Finn and Liam were still drawing, their worlds colourful and carefree. Silas forced a smile, trying to mask the storm in his heart. "Grandpa, can we go outside and play after lunch?" Liam asked, holding up a drawing of a dragon. Silas hesitated. Oakhaven's exterior was now a minefield. "Perhaps later, my little ones. Today we'll play inside. The weather is a bit unpredictable." He knew he needed to keep the boys close, under his constant watch. The bait was set in the library. The diamonds were safe for now. But the real battle was just beginning. Beaumont was not a patient man. He wanted the treasure, and he would do anything to get it. Silas looked out the window, the dense fog still enveloping the castle like a protective veil, but also like a prison. He was a grandfather, and for his grandsons he would become the most cunning of guardians, the fiercest of protectors. The game had begun, and Silas was ready to play, not for wealth, but for love. Night would bring not rest, but the certainty of an imminent battle. He was ready. The next morning arrived with the fog even thicker, a white cloak embracing Oakhaven, making it almost invisible from the outside, perfect for Beaumont's arrival. And he came, not in one car, but in a caravan of black utility vehicles, which materialized from the mist like ghosts. Beaumont stepped out of the first car, an imposing and impatient figure, his eyes sweeping the castle with an avidity Silas recognized as pure greed. He was not alone. Robust, silent men accompanied him, immediately fanning out to begin the search. Silas had prepared a hearty breakfast for the boys, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy. "Stay inside today, my little ones," he said, with a calm voice that belied the whirlwind in his chest. "We'll have a day of adventures indoors." He led them to the living room, where there were games and books, a safe refuge while the castle was invaded. Beaumont wasted no time. His men scoured every corner, every crevice, with brutal efficiency. Silas watched them from afar, his heart beating like a drum. He knew it was only a matter of time until the library became the focus. And it was. Shortly after noon, a muffled shout echoed through the corridors. "Lord Beaumont, I found something!" Silas felt a shiver of satisfaction. The bait had been taken. He heard Beaumont's hurried footsteps towards the library. Minutes later, the silence was broken by Beaumont's triumphant voice. "An old wooden box and a parchment. It's the map! I knew it! I knew Elias wouldn't fool me!" The euphoria in his voice was palpable. Greed blinded him. Silas waited. He knew Beaumont, in his arrogance, would try to decipher the map immediately. The parchment's deception, with its archaic symbols and Elias's handwriting, was convincing enough for a man who wanted to believe. The map, carefully crafted by Silas based on Elias's notes about secret passages, pointed to Oakhaven's oldest and most forgotten catacombs, culminating in a dead end that Elias had documented as a natural trap, a tunnel that collapsed in on itself. Hours passed. Beaumont's shouts, once triumphant, were now of frustration and rage. "It's a labyrinth, but I'll find it. No one fools Arthur Beaumont." Silas could hear him, his footsteps echoing through the underground passages growing fainter. The bait was working. Beaumont was getting lost in the false labyrinth, far from the true diamonds, far from the boys. Silas knew it was time. He had made a discreet call to the local police before Beaumont's arrival, reporting suspicious activities and the presence of armed men. He couldn't risk a direct confrontation with the boys nearby. Now, with Beaumont and his men distracted in the depths of the catacombs, it was the perfect opportunity. He gathered the boys, who were curious but obedient. "We're going on a little trip. My adventurers," he said with a genuine smile this time. He led them through the back door, along a less visible path, to the car. As they drove away, the siren of a police car tore through the fog, approaching Oakhaven. Silas felt a profound relief. The trap was complete. Beaumont would be caught, not with the treasure, but in his own greed, trapped in a labyrinth of his own making. Days later, the news spread. Arthur Beaumont and his men were found in Oakhaven's catacombs, trapped in a collapsed tunnel, exhausted and furious, with nothing but a false parchment and the humiliation of having been tricked. The police, alerted by Silas's report, arrested them for trespassing and illegal possession of weapons. Oakhaven's treasure, the true one, remained a secret. Silas, Finn, and Liam returned to Oakhaven. The stone house, once a place of mourning and mystery, now radiated a new energy. Silas retrieved the bag of diamonds and the love letter from the fireplace. He stored them in a secure safe, knowing they were Elias and Isabel's legacy, a future for Finn and Liam. The love letter, with its words of hope and unconditional love, was the true treasure. Silas looked at the boys, who were running through the garden, their laughter filling the air. He had kept his promise. He had protected the legacy, not just the fortune, but the love. Oakhaven was no longer just a house. It was a home, a sanctuary built on secrets, love, and the promise of a bright future. He was a grandfather, and for his grandsons he became the most cunning of guardians. And, in the end, love always found its way.